What's up, everybody? I'm Adam, and you're watching the Model Aviator channel. One of the more polarizing subjects in our hobby right now is AS3X Plus. That is Spektrum's proprietary stabilization system. It was developed to replace the OG AS3X, which has been around for over a decade now. AS3X Plus is still relatively new, and everyone that I've talked to that's tried it has nothing but great things to say about it. That said, there's still many out there that have questions that are a bit confused about certain aspects of it. So, we're going to devote 2 episodes specifically to AS3X Plus to try to clear some of that up, and of course, they'll be available for reference from now on. We're going to get started in this one with an interview with Miguel Alvarez. Miguel works for Spektrum RC and was a large part of developing AS3X Plus. In fact, he's the gentleman that wrote the code for it, so there's really no better source to tap into. This interview, he covers quite a bit. It is very educational and informative, and it is certainly worth the watch. So check out this interview with Miguel Alvarez, and then stick around for a minute or two after that, and we'll tell you about the second episode we're going to devote to AS3X Plus that quite a few of you have been asking for. Enjoy the interview. We are here with Miguel Alvarez from Horizon Hobby. Miguel, thanks so much for doing this, man.
No problem. Happy to be here.
And you are the mind behind AS3X Plus. So just for the folks that don't know, just let them know what your job title is and exactly what that entails with Horizon Hobby.
Sure. So I'm at Horizon Hobby. I'm kind of more under Spektrum, but Spektrum is a part of Horizon. I'm an electrical engineer by trade, but these days most of what I do is firmware. So kind of I used to do a lot of both, and now these days it's like 95% firmware. Yeah, that's basically what I do. Obviously, I'm very involved in all the stabilization code. I'm one of many people that work on code at Horizon. But yeah, a lot of this AS3X Plus stuff was my primary project. So yeah.
That's outstanding.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it's very, AS3X Plus is very impressive. We talked a couple days ago, and I told you all the things that I love about it. But I think one of the things that we talked about the other night is compatibility seems to be something that a lot of people are confused about with the new update to the transmitters. And just to kind of clear that up, you can pretty much bind any Spektrum transmitter to a bind and fly airplane that has AS3X Plus and fly it just fine. You just may be stuck with whatever the setup on that receiver is, but you can fly it with pretty much any transmitter that will bind to it, correct?
Yeah. If your transmitter does DSMX, it'll work with it, even if you can't go in and change the settings. Most of the compatibility stuff is for the forward programming side, which is like our remote interface from the radio to the receiver to change settings and all that. So, but if you're not changing settings, if you're just getting a bind and fly, as long as your radio does DSMX, doesn't need to be updated, it'll work with it. And the other thing that some people have asked is if I update my radio to the latest firmware, which is like the Plus firmware we released recently, can I still use that with receivers that don't have the Plus update? And yes, it is backwards compatible. There's probably a bit of confusion with naming the receiver update and the transmitter update both Plus. Right. But they're just kind of both Plus in their own way.
Right. So basically any transmitter, the DX transmitters, NX transmitters, and IX transmitters that have forward programming capability, you can change the settings in both the OG AS3X and the AS3X Plus in forward programming, even without the update. I think the update, doesn't that necessarily pertain to A, adding channels, and B, allowing you to upload the smart setup files on the new bind and fly planes?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because actually, when we released the new power safe with the Synapse sensor module back in February, and the radio update we released then is already compatible with AS3X Plus. So if you were on that update, you technically could have used the new receiver plus update that came out in July, I think is when we released it. I think there's a minor exception for that with some DX radios, but now if you install the latest DX update, it should be compatible with forward programming interface. And when I say DX, I mean G2, because there's like older DX radios from like, you know, like the original DX8 and the original DX7 and stuff that, you know, those haven't gotten updates for a long time already. If you look at the wiki page for the AS3X Plus setup, that'll tell you all the receivers compatible with the update and all the radios compatible with setting that up, and it'll tell you the minimum firmware version you need for those radios.
So one of the things that I think it's really important that people understand is that AS3X Plus is not just additional setup features to the OG AS3X. This is a completely new algorithm that was designed from the ground up. Can you talk to us about what is the difference in the AS3X Plus algorithm versus the OG?
Yeah, so it does kind of build on top of what we had before, but it's very, as far as how it feels and performs, it feels very like a very significant change, right? I would say the main improvements are one of the big improvements that comes with it is you can tune the feel of how it stops when you release the stick, and this is related to the stop lock setting we included. So the main example we use is back in the day, you would increase the gyro gain until you get a bounce when you release the stick to stop, and then you'd have to back off on the gain to get rid of that bounce, right? So in a way, you're kind of lowering the gain more than you maybe need to, and the stop lock rate kind of adjusts that interaction between the gyro stopping the plane versus the plane stopping more naturally. So it lets you get a bit of a higher gyro gain, and it mitigates some of that strong bounce that you get when you release the stick. So it's kind of just adjusting, do I want the gyro to stop it more, or do I want it to stop more naturally? And you can find like a balance where the gyro is stopping it, but it's also not overdoing the stop. And then you get a higher gyro gain that helps you for just flying through turbulence, or if you only have one gain setting and you fly at low speeds. Like some people like having a high speed gain and a low speed gain, and their low speed gain will just be really high. But this might help a little more with having a higher speed gain. So that's one of the things. And then there's some other behind the scenes stuff that helps a lot. For example, with turbulence, keeping the plane straight without turbulence. Like normally you might want some heading gain or something to help with that, and now you don't need that as much to help the plane track a little better through the air. And then there are also some changes to allow us to actually about double the effective gain compared to the original AS3X. So if you compare the original algorithm with the new one, behind the scenes, the starting gains you have are actually twice what they used to be.
Right.
Which obviously, helps with keeping the plane track better or resist outside movements better, that sort of thing.
Right.
I don't know if that kind of helps explain it. I know that kind of might be like a jumble of details, but the main thing that I see, because people ask this a lot, what's different? What's changed? And everyone always says it just feels more locked in, it feels better, and everyone gets frustrated because that's not what they want to hear. They want to understand technically what's better. And at the end of the day, I feel like you just have to feel the difference yourself. I think we kind of talked about this, so there were some analogies. I don't remember what was one of them, but like it's just, there's some things you just can't describe.
Right.
The analogy
Right.
I gave you, and it might not be great, is like you can describe to someone what a roller coaster feels like, but it doesn't prepare you for what you actually feel when you ride one.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, you can explain the G forces and stuff, and people be like, "Oh, okay, that's what it is." But no, like it doesn't really help you understand what it feels like, right? I mean, I don't know. That's
Yeah.
the way I see it, right? There are things
Yeah.
you just can't explain. You have to feel.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that we've had people request that we do a video showing side by side, you know, AS3X and then AS3X Plus on the same airplane, so they can quote unquote see the difference. And I've tried to explain that that's really not what it's about. A good pilot can make an airplane look good without a gyro, but what that pilot feels when you have
Yeah,
AS3X is completely different than what you feel when you don't have it. And then when you bring in AS3X Plus, the feeling is even more different. And the
yeah,
thing I noticed is that AS3X Plus truly makes airplanes feel bigger than they are. It rather than making them feel, I think the word we use is automated. It just feels like you're flying a bigger
yeah,
airplane. Yeah.
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 Because you mentioned like comparing to side by side, and it's really hard to show someone that, because part of the feel is the interaction between what you do on the stick versus what you feel the plane, like what the plane does, and you can't really show that to someone. Like so like a lot of times, like when we're developing AS3X, and David Payne, which is one of our product developers, and he was a big person in providing feedback for the changes I did on the code. He would explain something to me like, "Oh, this feels a little off or something," and he would describe it, and I'd kind of understand what he was saying, but I would have to fly it and do the same thing he was saying he is doing, so that I could feel, because he would show me and I don't know what part of the plane's movement is him and what part of it is a gyro. So the only way I could
Right.
really understand that interaction is me being the one controlling and then seeing what it does as I do
Yeah.
certain movements, right?
Yeah, and we're going to do a setup video on something with AS3X Plus and kind of show how we do it. But the truth is, it is about what the pilot feels, not what the spectator or the viewer sees
Right.
necessarily.
Yeah.
But so that wiki page that you talked about, I've actually printed a lot of that off that I have here that I take to the field with me when I'm tuning stuff, just so I have that as a reference, so that I fully
Yeah.
understand what each thing is doing. But would you say that taking a look at that wiki page would be the best way to learn how to go out and tune a model, basically follow the directions on that?
I would say it's definitely accurate information for what the parameters are and how we recommend to tune the model. I mean, the guide on there is basically what David and I agreed on was the ideal way to tune the model. And there are different options too. Like there's a basic setup and there's an advanced like fine tuning setup. There's a heading gain setup, at least for just like the AS3X setup. And then there's some other stuff for safe. But I would say that is what we consider ideal. And as far as, you know, factual information for what the parameters do and stuff, that's going to be 100% accurate. Now, that being said, I know that not everyone learns the same way. Sometimes reading through stuff is can be a little too much, and you need to have like a visual reference for things. So like a lot of people like watching videos, and that's totally fine. We have a few videos, but we haven't spent, admittedly, we haven't spent a lot of time doing a lot of in-depth videos compared to the information we've put on the wiki. But the wiki was kind of, for me at least, a place where we could put correct information, detailed information. It's easy to update quickly. You know, like once you do a video, changing stuff after the fact is complicated, right? So as a baseline, we wanted to at least have the wiki. People are going to go do their videos, and you know, and different people show things differently. I was telling you this the other day, like sometimes someone explains something, I'll watch a video and I'll be like, that's not totally correct, I don't know, but
Right.
but it works, and that might make sense to someone else as opposed to maybe the way we explain it and stuff like that. So really, I mean, as long as it works and it makes sense to someone, and it gets them across that hurdle of figuring out how to use this, I think that's fine. But yeah, I mean, sometimes misinformation spreads inevitably. So I would say at least the wiki, if you have any doubts, what's on the wiki is probably as correct as it can be. And if something doesn't make sense, I mean, I'm usually answering questions on Facebook. Some of the other guys are answering questions on Facebook, RC groups. Sometimes even like videos that you guys make, I'll hop in on comments sometimes and, you know, mention things, call out things that like, hey, this is actually this and that. And not always, but sometimes.
Right. Well, and you can bet having you as a contact is it's really a blessing, because now when we do our video, you can bet I'll send it to you privately and let you double check everything that we said in it to make sure that the information is correct. And if somebody asks me a question, just so our viewers know, if somebody asks me a question now about AS3X Plus, and I'm pretty certain, I'll answer it. If I'm not certain, I'll text you and ask you, and then I'll answer it, because the whole purpose of this is to try and get it. There's a lot, and it can be very confusing, especially to somebody that's never messed with a gyro before. So we're going to do our best to get the correct information out there. So I appreciate
once
you
misinformation starts spreading, it's very tough to stop. You know, it's tough. It's tough to stop it sometimes. Like I said, it's inevitable, but yeah, when a new product comes out or firmware or something, I'm usually very active on RC groups and Facebook. Like I track the threads on RC groups. Like I'll refresh that like I won't put the notifications because then it gets a little out of hand. But I'll refresh that like every 30 minutes for like 2 weeks in a row and answer questions and everything. And then once things kind of die down, I mean, the great thing about these communities is other people learn, and then they also help others. So it's like I don't have to be on there all the time. Like I have other things I also need to do, right? So but at least kind of trying to get good information out right at the start, and then that kind of just organically spreads, and you know. And then like I said, some people they learn and they explain it differently. Sometimes the way I explain it doesn't make sense, but someone else explains it better. So I know that everything I say is not the best way to say it, and
well, I mean, that's true.
You get what I'm saying? Yeah.
I learned that instructing, because I used to instruct a bunch of people. I instruct more people online now than I do personally, just because of the YouTube channel. I don't have time. But you know, when I was instructing, I learned that you have to learn to say the same thing several different ways if you really want to stick with people and make them truly understand what you're trying to say. Because something that might resonate with 10 of your students, you might get that one, and that just doesn't work with them. So you have to figure out another way to make them understand. And so getting the same information out 10 different ways is a great thing, as long as it's accurate. And we're going to try and make sure that everything we put out on AS3X is. So talk about some of the new features. You talked about the stop lock and the stop lock release, but there's a lot of other things. There's the multi-gyro. There's the nose wheel gyro. Tell us about some of that stuff and the advantages of that.
I'll start with the nose wheel, since that one's kind of, I think, a little more straightforward. So this is actually not totally new. We had a version of this only on previous power safe receivers, 2310T and some other versions of that, with AS3000 was the stabilization module. And the nose wheel feature is basically just it's stabilization for a nose wheel. If you have a nose wheel tied to a separate channel for your yaw input, so you can't have it on the same channel as your rudder. Some people have asked, and you can use it on a tail wheel if it's on a separate linkage and channel from your rudder. And basically, it just lets you give that nose wheel or tail wheel separate gain settings and even heading gain if you want from your main control surfaces. So from your, in this case specifically, different from your rudder. And you can also make that gain turn off when your retracts are up. Whereas you could tie that to your retract channel, so you can make it turn off when the gear's up and then turn back on when the gear comes out, and you can set a delay for that. So like your gear isn't out instantly, so you could set a delay. So it's kind of a set of stabilization settings specific to the nose wheel. And normally having a heading gain on your rudder is a little dangerous, because if you don't do coordinated turns, like a lot of people starting off, they'll just do bank and yank, like so roll and then pitch and just do that, and they don't touch the rudder. What happens when you have heading on the rudder and you don't do that is you're not resetting that heading position, so it starts accumulating when you're turning and you know, banking and yanking, and then the rudder's like starts fighting you, and the plane will just do really weird stuff. And I know some people have tried that and were banking and yanking. They almost crashed, or some people probably have crashed their planes putting heading hold on rudder. So it's not ideal, but putting it on the nose wheel is a different story. And having heading on the nose wheel helps a lot, especially on larger planes. If you have if your brakes aren't perfect, like if you have more brake on one wheel than the other, and it'll tend to veer to the side, the nose wheel can help a little bit with that. I've seen very huge improvements with crosswinds, because they'll push your vertical stabilizer, and it'll just make the plane want to turn regardless of whether whether your nose wheel is trimmed or not. So it just helps having straight takeoffs and landings.
Right.
And I mean, yeah. I also one of the examples recently when we released this, actually one of the beta testers, and I think some other guys have done it, is they'll use it on the little rudder that you have on like floats sometimes, so in water as well. You know, that's technically not a nose wheel, but it's similar concept. So as long as you have that on a separate channel, that's another place you can use it. Yeah, so that's nose wheel.
So on that, real quick, I noticed I fly out at a place called Georgia Jets, and there's a lot of 40, 50 pound, 200-mile-an-hour turbines, and you really have to be exactly what you were describing with the brakes. If the brakes aren't perfect, almost everybody uses the nose wheel gyro with an airplane like that, because you can't afford to have an airplane like that take a wrong turn and head into the pits. So
yeah,
that's definitely one of the things I know that nose wheel gyro would be very, very useful for.
Yeah, I mean, on my jet, I land and I just slam the brakes and it just stays straight the whole time. I used to have to be active on the nose wheel, and I barely have to touch it if I'm already tracking straight. At least, once you get the nose wheel down, right? Because while it's up, it's not going to do it for you. And I know there are also some systems that some gear controllers that have built-in gyros, so you can have stabilization on the actual brakes. But if you don't have that, having stabilization on the nose wheel can help a bit.
Yeah. And what about some of the other, like the multi-gyro?
Yeah. So there's also the auxiliary setup stuff that was included with AS3X Plus. And then I'll get into the additional gyro systems. But the auxiliary setup stuff basically just lets you set up custom control surfaces. So flaperons, thrust vector, stuff you don't do with your standard wing types on the radio. Because previously, when you set up stabilization through forward programming, you could only stabilize outputs that were part of your wing type. So like your ailerons, your elevator, rudder, etc. But if you made a custom output with a mix, you couldn't stabilize that. So the aux output setup lets you teach the receiver how your custom outputs work, so you can stabilize those as well. The extra gyro system feature, which is only available on the 10360 and the 2410T, so basically our higher channel count receivers, that's basically the equivalent of having a totally separate gyro or flight controller, receiver, whatever you want to call it, in that same receiver. So you could set it up with totally different settings, totally different gains, totally different flight modes. So for example, the most common use for me is thrust vectoring. So normally with thrust vectoring, you want I use much stronger gains. I'm assuming this is a standard thing, but you use much stronger gains than you would on your elevator and rudder for your like your primary controls. And in some cases, you don't always want it to be on. You want to be able to turn the stabilization off on that without turning off stabilization on your actual elevator and rudder. So if you put those on a separate gyro system, you can give it its own gains, settings, heading, whatever you want to give it. And you can also assign it a separate flight mode channel, so you could turn it off independently without turning off the gains on your primary controls. The other one I've seen is canards. That's another example where people use that. Technically, the nose wheel is kind of a built-in separate gyro system because it has its own settings and turns off, but that has its own dedicated feature, so you don't need that. But if we didn't have the nose wheel feature, you could technically use an extra gyro system to set up a nose wheel, right?
Gotcha.
That's kind of the main thing. The other one I use it on is full span ailerons. So like mixing aileron into your flaps. That doesn't get registered by the receiver as a primary surface, but you can set that up with the aux outputs and either make them part of your primary gyro system one or put them on a separate one. So on my jet with thrust vectoring, for example, when I enable thrust vectoring, I also enable stabilization for those the flaps. So I get a little bit more authority on the stabilization doing high alpha and things like that. Slow speed stuff.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, I've tried that out with you helped me with the thrust vectoring on an Avanti, which is that's pretty cool. I can't wait to do the video on that. That is really neat.
I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, that'll be cool. So when it comes to the smart setup files, we explained that in a video that it was a review video, so people may or may not see that. I think a lot of people will see this. So why don't you explain what the smart setup files are and what the advantage of that is?
Yeah. So we call them smart transmitter files, and basically for our new bind and flies going forward, and I think the 64 millimeter Habu is the first one we released with that, right?
Yep.
So basically, it's a set of transmitter settings that live on the receiver model file. So when you bind your radio, it'll tell the radio, assuming your radio's up to date, because you do need to update it too. It'll tell you, hey, there's a smart transmitter file on this receiver. Do you want to download it? And you hit yes, and it'll wipe whatever your current model is and download these settings. And basically, you don't have to set up the model file yourself. You don't have to go download it online and import it. It'll just do it for you. So I mean, really, for a bind and fly, it's truly becoming more and more literally bind and fly, right?
Yeah, I tried that with the Viper, and it's interesting. I mean, all of the voice prompts are programmed. Everything is ready to rock and roll for you. But I think it's important that people know once you do that, if you want to modify any of those settings, you can go into forward programming and adjust anything in that setting if you want to. And of course, you have the choice to pass on that and then just set the transmitter up and set the airplane up the way you normally would if it weren't there.
Right. Yeah. It could just be like just a quicker baseline to work with, right? And you don't have to do it. You could just skip the download and and just like if you already have a template you like using for your bind and flies and stuff, you can still use that. But yeah, this is kind of like as far as all the recommendations we make on the manual for how to set up the model for the bind and fly and stuff, this will basically just do it for you.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. So the other question that I had for you, we talked about that. You said this is the only thing you really had to put a lot of thought into. So I'm going to challenge you with this question: Are there misconceptions out there that you've seen that you'd like to, and not necessarily misconceptions, but just is there some misinformation out there about AS3X that you've seen in abundance that you'd like to set straight so that people know what the truth is?
Yeah, I did think about this for a while, and honestly, I couldn't really think of anything other than like, you know, the whole transmitter receiver compatibility stuff that we talked about earlier.
Right.
I just kind of couldn't come up with anything, honestly. There's nothing
right.
Heinous out there or whatever. I'm like, this has got to stop spreading. Oh my god, wrong. No, I think for the most part, most of the information going around out there seems good. Most of the guide videos I've seen people make are for the most part good. Like I said, there's some things I might disagree in as far as like methods and things like that, but there's nothing terribly bad in anything. And you know, as if it makes sense to people and they follow those directions and it works, then, you know, even if the reason why something is done a certain way I might disagree with, as long as it works for people and people are happy, then I'm happy. At the end of the day, we just want people to enjoy the product, and I try to make sure the information out there is correct because I think that helps people have a better experience.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important that people understand there's so many different ways to set an airplane up, and AS3X Plus is just yet another variable. So as long as you're having fun, you're not putting anybody in danger. If you like the result you get, then the way you do it for you is A-okay.
Yeah.
So, well, so to wrap this up, is there anything that we didn't talk about or that I didn't ask that you would like to mention?
I don't know if this needs mentioning, but for all the receivers that are 8 channels or lower that you upgrade to AS3X Plus, you can't go back. I don't know if that's, I mean, I know that's kind of out there everywhere where when you go to download it, it literally tells you there's no going back. The only exception is the 10360, you can go back. But everything else, and really, I don't see a reason why you'd want to go back.
Well,
it's just so much better.
Once you do it and try it, you're not going to want to go back. I mean, it's you know,
if you're updating it, it's because you're probably going to set up the model yourself. You're not using the bind and fly model file, or we do have 3 model files online for the Viper 90, the Erratics, and the RJG Decathlon. So if you upgrade your receiver on those, you can download and import the new model files we made for those. But otherwise, if you're just keeping the stock bind and fly setup and updating it without factory resetting it and setting it up yourself, you're not really getting any benefit. So I think anyone updating is planning on setting it up themselves. And I would say I'll add one detail to that. As far as our basic setup, where you just assign a gain channel, crank it up a little, find like the right spot, and then fly it like, you know, where it doesn't bounce, just fly it like that. doing that alone is way better than probably most of our fine-tuned models on the older firmware. Because on those models, like, we'll fine-tune the roll, pitch, and yaw, everything. If you take this new firmware and you just kind of slider set it about where it seems fine, that's way better than, in my opinion, than what the old firmware was. So the only thing as far as basic setup is you don't get safe and other things unless you also go and set those things up.
Well, man, thank you so much, Miguel, for taking the time.
No problem at all.
I think this will do a lot of good for a lot of people and answer a lot of questions people had.
I hope so.
Well, thanks a lot, man. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
No problem. Have a good night.
So we have to give some thanks. First of all, thank you to Ethan Ader from Horizon Hobby for putting us in touch with Miguel Alvarez and making the possibility for this interview happen. And of course, thank you very much to Miguel Alvarez himself for taking the time to talk to us on the phone, do this interview, take a thumbnail picture and get that sent to us. A lot of work goes into these episodes, and he played a large part in this one for sure. So thank you very much to him. Now, when it comes to the second episode on AS3X Plus, a lot of people want us to tune an airplane on camera. That's exactly what we're going to do, but it entails other things. We're going to have to cover a little bit about our philosophy on tuning an airplane with a gyro, because that has a lot to do with the way we tune it, which will be different than other people. So the next episode is going to be on that. Now, we haven't shot this yet. It's going to take a minute to get that done. We have some other things we have to do before that, but we will get to it as quickly as we possibly can. It is on the short list. We'll talk to you about our philosophy on setting one up. We'll take an airplane out to the field, and from start to finish, we'll show you how we tune it with the AS3X Plus. So that's what's coming up. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll put our affiliate links in the description. If you need anything from Horizon Hobby or Tower Hobbies when you go through those links, help support our channel and help us make it easier to do things like this for you. So when you do that, we appreciate it. Thank you. That's it for us. Take care of yourselves. Happy flying. We'll see you next week with something cool with wings.